It's not easy to put into words what just happened. Because the miracle God performed among some of the top Islamic leaders in Somalia during one of their largest annual rituals seems almost impossible. This extraordinary event left even the highest religious authorities searching for answers. Many imams personally testified about the revelations Jesus shared with them, truths that, if you watch this video until the very end, will open your eyes to see that the ordinary events happening around your workplace, your family, and your community may actually be part of end-time prophecies coming to life. Jesus revealed a powerful secret to him, one that every believer needs to embrace today, which became the key to this miraculous encounter. We would love to know where you are watching from. Quickly let us know you're watching from so that our prayer team can lift you and your family up in prayer. Make sure to watch all the way through. This message could change the way you see everything happening around you. I still remember the night my life broke open like a clay pot hitting stone. It was in Mogadishu, Somalia at exactly 2:13 a.m. when the call to prayer had not yet begun, and the city was wrapped in a strange silence that felt heavier than usual. My name is Yusuf Abdi, and at that time I was one of 10 imams serving in a mosque located on Via Makkah al-Mukarrama Road, not far from the old market. I had spent years studying, teaching, and defending what I believed was the truth. I was respected, trusted, and feared in some circles because of how strongly I spoke. But that night something happened that I cannot explain in human terms alone. Earlier that evening, we had gathered as we always did. There were 10 of us, myself, Sheikh Ibrahim, old but sharp, young Farah, full of fire, Bashir, quiet but observant, and the others who had walked the same path as me for years. We spoke about rising tension in the city, about rumors that some young people were secretly turning away from Islam. We were angry, we were determined to stop it. I remember slamming my hand on the wooden table and saying that we must protect the faith at all costs. Deep inside, though, I had questions I never told anyone. Questions that had been growing quietly like roots under dry soil. Sometimes when I prayed, I felt empty. Sometimes when I read, I felt like something was missing, like a door was closed, but I did not know where it was. That night after the meeting, I went home to my small house in Hodden district. My wife Amina was asleep and my son little Khalid was curled up beside her. I watched them for a moment, feeling a strange weight in my chest. I lay down, but sleep did not come easily. My mind kept racing, then it happened. I felt something like a presence in the room, not fear, not exactly, more like awareness. My eyes opened, and though the room was dark, it felt filled with light I could not see but somehow knew was there. My heart started beating fast. I tried to move, but I felt still, like I was being held in place, not by force but by something stronger than fear. In that moment, I knew I was not alone. He revealed to me something I had never considered deeply before, not in words I could hear with my ears, but in understanding that filled my whole being. It was about truth, about love, about a path I had rejected without truly knowing. I saw flashes, images, moments, things that felt both new and ancient at the same time. I saw a man, calm, strong, full of peace in a way I had never known. I knew who he was without anyone telling me. It shook me to my core. I tried to resist. My mind fought back. I told myself this was wrong, that I was being deceived. But the more I resisted, the more something inside me broke, not in pain, but in release. Like chains I did not know I carried were falling off. Tears began to run down my face. I had not cried like that since I was a child. He let me know that truth was not something to fear. He showed me that love was greater than power, greater than control, greater than anything I had built my life around. And for the first time in many years I felt peace, real peace. Not the kind you speak about, but the kind that settles deep inside you. When it ended, I sat up suddenly, breathing hard. The room was quiet again. The darkness looked normal, but I was not the same. I looked at my hands, trembling. I whispered to myself, asking what had just happened. I did not have the answers yet, but I knew one thing clearly. My life had just changed forever. What I did not know was that, at that exact same night, the other 9 imams had experienced something almost identical. And by morning, everything we thought we knew would be tested. Morning came too quickly, and yet it felt like I had lived through years in a single night. The sun rose slowly over Mogadishu, casting a soft orange glow across the dusty streets of Hodden district, but inside me there was no calm. My heart was still unsettled, my thoughts moving in circles, trying to understand what had happened. I washed my face, hoping the cold water would bring clarity, but the moment I looked into the mirror, I knew something was different. My eyes looked the same, but there was a depth in them I had never seen before, like someone who had crossed a line they could never return from. Amina noticed it immediately. She stood by the doorway, watching me in silence for a few seconds before asking if I was all right. Her voice carried concern, but also curiosity. I tried to answer her, but my words came out slow and uncertain. I told her I did not sleep well, that I had a strange experience during the night. She stepped closer, searching my face, asking what kind of experience. For a moment, I hesitated. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? How could I tell my wife, who trusted me as a leader, that I had encountered something that challenged everything I had ever taught? I simply told her that I felt troubled, that I needed time to think. She nodded, but I could tell she was not convinced. She knew me too well. I was not a man easily shaken, yet here I was, unable to stand firm in my own certainty. I left the house earlier than usual and walked toward the mosque. The streets were beginning to fill with life, vendors arranging their goods, children running with laughter, the distant sound of motorbikes cutting through the morning air. Everything looked normal, yet to me, it all felt different, like I was seeing the world through new eyes. When I arrived at the mosque, I noticed something unusual. The courtyard was quieter than expected, and a few of the other imams were already there, standing in small groups, speaking in low voices. Their faces carried the same tension I felt inside. As I approached, Sheikh Ibrahim turned toward me, his expression serious, almost troubled in a way I had never seen before. Before I could greet him, he asked me directly if I had experienced anything unusual during the night. His question struck me like a sudden wind. I paused, studying his face, trying to understand what he meant. Then I saw it clearly. He was not asking out of curiosity. He was asking because something had happened to him too. I slowly nodded. There was a moment of silence, heavy and thick, as if the air itself was waiting for us to speak truthfully. Then one by one, the others began to share. Farah spoke first, his voice shaking slightly as he described a presence in his room, a feeling he could not ignore. Bashir followed, saying he had seen something that left him questioning everything. Each story was different in detail, but the core was the same. All 10 of us had encountered something beyond explanation on the same night. My heart began to race again. This was no longer just my personal struggle. This was something bigger, something none of us could easily dismiss. We tried to reason it out. Some suggested it could be a test. Others wondered if it was deception. A few were too afraid to even finish their thoughts. I remember Sheikh Ibrahim lowering his voice and saying that whatever it was, it had shaken him deeply, more than anything in his many years of service. Hearing that from a man like him made the situation even more serious. We decided to close ourselves inside one of the inner rooms of the mosque, away from the people, away from distractions. The walls of that room had witnessed many discussions before, but none like this. There was no anger this time, no pride, no loud arguments. Only fear, confusion, and a strange sense that we were standing at the edge of something unknown. As we sat in a circle, I felt a growing tension in my chest. My mind kept returning to what had been revealed to me during the night. The peace I felt then was now mixed with fear of what it could mean for my life, my family, my position, and even my safety. In Somalia, questions like these were not taken lightly. They could cost you everything. Farah suddenly stood up and began pacing the room. He said he could not ignore what he experienced, that it felt too real to be dismissed. Another imam quickly responded, warning him to be careful, reminding him of the consequences of even entertaining such thoughts. The room grew tense again, but this time it was not anger that filled the space. It was fear of the truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. Deep inside, I knew that whatever had happened was not something I could simply forget and move on from. It was like a seed had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it would grow. Then something unexpected happened. Sheikh Ibrahim, the oldest among us, leaned forward and spoke in a quiet but firm voice. He said that what he experienced during the night brought him a sense of peace he had never known before, and that he could not deny it, no matter how difficult it was to accept. Those words changed the atmosphere in the room. For the first time, someone had spoken openly without fear, without trying to hide behind explanations or traditions. It was a small moment, but it carried great weight. I looked around and saw that the others felt it too. We were no longer just confused men trying to protect what we believed. We were now men standing face to face with a truth we did not fully understand, but could no longer ignore. And in that moment, I realized something that made my heart tremble. If what we experienced was real, then everything we had built our lives on was about to be tested in ways we never imagined. The question was no longer whether something had happened. The question was what we were going to do about it. That morning did not end with answers. It only opened a door we could not close. After we left that inner room in the mosque, we all went our separate ways, but none of us returned to our normal routines in the same way. Something had shifted inside us, and even the simple act of leading prayers felt heavier than before. As I stood in front of the people later that day, reciting words I had known all my life, I felt a strange distance between what I was saying and what was now growing inside my heart. It was not that I suddenly rejected everything, but I could no longer ignore the questions rising within me. I remember looking at the faces of the people behind me as they prayed. These were people who trusted me, who listened to my teachings, who believed I was guiding them in truth. That realization brought fear into my heart. If I was now unsure, what did that mean for them? What did that mean for my responsibility? Later that afternoon, I returned home, but I did not speak much. Amina kept watching me, trying to understand what was going on. She asked me again what was troubling me, but this time her voice carried a deeper concern. I sat down and tried to explain, choosing my words carefully. I told her that something happened during the night that made me question things I had never questioned before. She listened quietly, her face serious, her eyes searching mine for clarity. When I finished, she did not respond immediately. Instead, she asked me one simple question. If what I experienced felt like peace, why was I afraid of it? That question stayed with me. That evening I could not sit still. I kept walking back and forth in the small compound outside my house, thinking about everything. The images from the night before kept returning to my mind. The presence I felt, the understanding that filled me, the peace that followed, it was all too real to ignore. Yet the fear of what it could mean for my life held me back. I decided that I needed to search for answers, but I had to do it carefully. In a place like Mogadishu, asking the wrong questions openly could bring serious consequences, so I began quietly. The first step was something I never thought I would do. I reached out to an old acquaintance named Daniel, a man I had met years ago during a community discussion. He lived in Wabri district and I knew he was a Christian. At the time we met, I had argued strongly against his beliefs, convinced that I was right and he was wrong. But now he was the only person I could think of who might help me understand what I had experienced. I did not go during the day. I waited until evening when the streets were less crowded and people were less likely to notice where I was going. As I walked toward his house, my heart was beating fast. Every step felt like I was crossing a line I could not return from. I kept looking around, making sure no one I knew was watching. When I reached his compound, I hesitated at the gate. My hand hovered for a moment before I finally knocked. A few seconds later, he opened the door. At first, he looked surprised to see me, but then his expression softened. He greeted me warmly as if no time had passed between us. We sat inside his small living room. It was simple but peaceful. There was something different about the atmosphere there, something calm that I could not fully explain. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked me why I had come. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about the night, about the presence I felt, about what had been revealed to me, and about the same experience happening to the other imams. As I spoke, I expected him to react with excitement or surprise, but instead, he listened quietly, nodding occasionally, as if he had heard similar stories before. When I finished, he remained silent for a moment, then he began to speak slowly and carefully. He explained things in a way that was simple, not complicated, using words I could understand easily. He spoke about truth not being forced but revealed. He spoke about love that reaches people even in places where they are not expecting it. He spoke about a relationship, not just religion. As he spoke, something inside me began to connect. It was not like I suddenly understood everything, but it felt like pieces were starting to come together. He then brought out a book. I recognized it immediately, though I had never read it for myself. He placed it in front of me and told me that if I truly wanted to understand what I experienced, I needed to read it with an open heart, not as someone trying to argue, but as someone searching for truth. I hesitated. Taking that book felt like crossing a boundary I had spent my whole life defending. But at that moment, I remembered the peace I felt during the night and the question Amina had asked me earlier. Slowly, I reached out and took it. That night, I returned home with the book hidden under my clothes. I waited until everyone was asleep before I brought it out. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it for the first time. I did not know where to begin, so I started from one of the sections Daniel had pointed out. As I read, something unexpected happened. The words did not feel strange or foreign. Instead, they felt alive, like they were speaking directly to me. Each line seemed to answer questions I had not even fully formed in my mind. There were moments when I had to stop reading, just to take. Hours passed, but I did not notice the time. At one point, I felt that same presence again, not as strong as the first night, but enough to remind me that I was not alone in this journey. He let me understand that this search was not a mistake, that I was being guided step by step. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they were not from fear, they were from realization. But even as hope began to rise inside me, I knew something else was also growing: danger. Because if what I was discovering was true, then my life as I knew it would not remain the same. And I was not the only one walking this path. The other 9 imams were also searching, each in their own way, and soon our secret search would no longer remain hidden. The days that followed were no longer normal, even though everything around me tried to appear the same. I continued my duties at the mosque. I greeted people in the streets. I sat with other leaders as we always had, but inside me, a quiet battle was taking place. Each night I returned to that book, reading slowly, carefully, allowing every word to sink deep into my heart. And the more I read, the clearer things became. It was no longer just questions anymore. It was understanding, it was conviction, it was truth pressing hard against everything I had built my life upon. But with that truth came a growing fear, because I knew that accepting it would not come without a cost. The other imams were going through the same struggle. We began meeting again, but this time in secret, not in the open spaces of the mosque. We chose quiet places, sometimes an unfinished building on the edge of Wadajir district, sometimes a hidden corner behind an old shop after dark. Each of us carried the same tension in our eyes. When we spoke, it was no longer with confidence, but with careful honesty. One by one, we admitted that we had also started searching, reading, and trying to understand what had been revealed to us. Some had gone further than others, but none of us could deny that something real was happening. The strongest among us, Sheikh Ibrahim, finally said what many of us were afraid to say aloud. He told us that the truth we were finding was not something we could turn away from, no matter how difficult it would be. That was the moment everything became serious. Because in Somalia, especially in Mogadishu, such a path is not just a personal decision, it is a dangerous one. We all knew stories of people who had disappeared, people who had been rejected by their families, people who had lost everything because of a change in belief. And now we were standing on that same path. I remember Farah sitting quietly, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke about his younger siblings and how they depended on him. Bashir said very little, but the fear in his eyes said enough. As for me, my thoughts kept returning to Amina and my son Khalid. What would happen to them if the truth inside me became known outside? The pressure began to increase even from within the mosque. There were whispers among the community, small at first but noticeable. People began to sense that something was different among us. One afternoon, a respected elder approached me after prayers and asked if everything was all right, saying that my teachings had changed slightly, that my tone was softer, less forceful. I tried to dismiss it, but his words stayed with me. It was becoming harder to hide what was happening inside. At home, Amina could no longer ignore it. One evening, after I had spent hours reading in silence, she sat beside me and asked me directly what I was truly searching for. This time, I did not avoid the question. I told her that I was beginning to see things differently, that I had found something that brought me a kind of peace I had never known before. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully, expecting fear or anger. Instead, she became quiet, thinking deeply. After a long silence, she said something that stayed with me. She told me that she had noticed a change in me, not just confusion, but a kind of calm that was new. She did not fully understand it, but she could not deny it. That moment gave me a small strength, but it did not remove the reality of what was coming, because truth, I was learning, does not remain hidden forever. And the more we embraced it, the more it began to demand something from us, not just belief, but courage. There comes a point in every man's life when he can no longer stand between two paths, and for me, that moment arrived quietly but firmly. It was late one night, long after the city had gone still, as I sat alone in my room with the book open before me. I had read enough to understand, enough to feel the truth settle deep inside my heart, and enough to know that what I was experiencing was not temporary. It was real, and it was calling me to respond. I could no longer pretend to be searching while secretly holding back. The truth demanded a decision. Not tomorrow, not later, but now. And in that quiet moment, with no one around to influence me, I surrendered, not with loud words or dramatic actions, but with a deep, personal acceptance inside my heart. I acknowledged what had been revealed to me, and I chose to follow it, even though I knew the cost would be great. The next day, when we gathered again as the 10 of us, something was different. There was a new seriousness in the room, but also a strange peace among us. One by one, we began to speak, and it became clear that I was not alone in my decision. Sheikh Ibrahim spoke first, his voice steady despite his age, saying that he had also reached a point where he could no longer deny the truth. Farah followed, though fear was still visible in his eyes, admitting that he had made the same choice during the night. As we went around the circle, all 10 of us shared the same reality. What had begun as confusion had now become conviction. We were no longer just searching, we had crossed over. That realization brought both relief and fear at the same time. Relief because we were no longer alone in this journey. Fear because we all understood what it meant. There was no going back to how things were before. Our positions, our respect in the community, our safety, even our families, all of it could be affected. Yet, despite all of that, there was a peace among us that we could not explain. It was the same peace that had first touched us that night, now stronger, more settled, like a foundation we could stand on. We began to talk about what this meant for our lives going forward. We knew we could not continue leading in the same way, pretending nothing had changed. At the same time, we could not simply announce our decision openly without understanding the consequences. It was a dangerous balance, and we had to move carefully, but deep inside, each of us knew that truth cannot stay hidden forever. The more we tried to contain it, the more it would find its way out. When I returned home that evening, I sat with Amina and told her everything clearly for the first time. I did not hide anything. I told her about the decision I had made, about the truth I had come to believe, and about the path I was now choosing to follow. As I spoke, my heart was heavy, not because I doubted my decision, but because I feared how it would affect her and our son. She listened quietly, her face calm but serious, taking in every word. When I finished, there was a long silence between us. Then she looked at me and said that she could see that this was not confusion anymore, that this was something real and deeply rooted in me. She did not fully understand it yet, but she told me she would not turn away from me because of it. Her response gave me strength, but it also reminded me of the responsibility I now carried. Because this decision was not just about me anymore, it was about everyone connected to my life, and as I stepped into this new path, I knew one thing clearly: the hardest part was still ahead. It did not take long before what we tried to keep hidden began to show itself. At first, it was small things that people noticed: the way we spoke, the softness in our tone, the absence of the harsh warnings we once gave so boldly. Then it became more visible in our teachings, as we began to speak more about love, mercy, and truth in ways that were different from before. Even when we tried to remain careful, something inside us had already changed too deeply to be covered. The people who listened to us every day were not blind, and slowly, questions began to rise within the community. Some came quietly to ask if everything was all right, while others began to whisper among themselves, trying to understand what was happening to the 10 imams they once saw as unshakable. The moment everything broke open came on a Friday, during one of the largest gatherings at the mosque. I stood before the people, my heart heavy but clear, knowing that I could no longer stand there and pretend. As I began to speak, I felt that same presence again, calm and steady, giving me a strength I did not have on my own. I spoke carefully, not with anger or force, but with honesty. I spoke about truth, about the need to seek it sincerely, even when it challenges everything we know. I could feel the atmosphere in the mosque change as I spoke. People were listening, but not in the usual way. There was tension, confusion, and even discomfort spreading through the crowd. When I finished, there was no usual calm exit. Instead, small groups began to form, voices rising, questions turning into accusations. Some people approached me directly, demanding to know what I meant by my words. Others looked at me with suspicion, as if I had become a stranger overnight. I tried to respond calmly, but I could see that something had already shifted beyond control. The whispers that had been growing quietly were now becoming open discussions. Later that same day, we were called together by some of the senior leaders in the community. The meeting was not friendly. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with tension and authority. We were questioned directly, one by one, about our beliefs, about our recent teachings, about any changes we had made. It was clear that they already suspected something, and they were looking for confirmation. In that moment we faced a choice again, to deny everything and protect ourselves, or to stand in the truth we had come to know. Silence filled the room as they waited for our answers. Then Sheikh Ibrahim spoke. His voice was calm but firm. He did not argue or defend himself with long explanations. He simply made it clear that what had happened to us was real, that we had encountered something we could not deny, and that it had changed us completely. His words were not aggressive, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. One by one we stood with him. No one stepped back, no one tried to hide anymore. The reaction was immediate. Anger rose quickly in the room. Voices became louder, accusations stronger, and the tone shifted from questioning to condemnation. We were warned about the seriousness of what we were saying, reminded of the consequences, and given a chance to reconsider. But deep inside, we had already made our decision. The truth we had found was not something we could abandon out of fear. By the time we left that meeting, everything had changed. News spread faster than we expected. Within days, the entire area knew about us. Some people avoided us completely. Others looked at us with anger. A few, very few, approached us quietly, asking questions, curious about what had led to such a change. But the majority saw us as men who had crossed a line that should never be crossed. At home, the tension became real. Amina began to feel the pressure from neighbors and relatives. Questions came from all sides, some gentle, some harsh. I could see the weight it placed on her, even though she tried to remain strong. For my son Khalid, things began to change as well. Children can be unkind without understanding, and he started to notice the difference in how others treated him. Despite all this, something inside me remained steady. The peace that had come with the truth did not leave, even in the middle of fear and rejection. It was not loud or overwhelming, but it was constant, like a quiet anchor holding me in place. And I knew the others felt it too, but as the days passed, it became clear that exposure was only the beginning, because what comes after truth is revealed is not always acceptance. Sometimes it is resistance, and sometimes it is persecution. What followed after everything was exposed was not just rejection, but pressure that came from every direction, slowly at first and then all at once. It began with words, harsh comments in the streets, people turning their faces away when we passed, and voices filled with anger questioning how we could abandon what we had once defended so strongly. Then it grew into something deeper. Some of us received warnings, not in open daylight, but through quiet messages carried by others, telling us to return to our former path or be ready to face serious consequences. The weight of it all settled heavily on our lives, affecting not just us, but our families as well. I remember one evening when Amina told me that a close relative had refused to visit our home anymore, saying that we had brought shame. Hearing that hurt more than I expected, not because I doubted my decision, but because I could see how far the impact had spread. There were moments when fear tried to rise inside me, especially at night when the city grew quiet and my thoughts became louder. I thought about my son Khalid, about his future, about whether my decision would bring hardship upon him. I thought about the life I once had, the respect, the stability, the sense of belonging, and for a brief moment, I understood how easy it would be to step back, to say it was all a misunderstanding, and return to what people expected of me. But each time that thought came, something stronger rose within me. It was the same peace, the same truth that had found me that night, reminding me that what I had received was not something to trade for comfort or safety. The other imams were facing the same fire. We continued to meet, not as leaders of a mosque anymore, but as brothers holding on to the same truth. Some of them had it even harder. Farah struggled with the pressure from his family, who depended on him and could not understand his decision. Bashir faced threats that forced him to leave his home for a time. Yet despite all this, none of us turned back. Instead, something unexpected began to happen. Our faith, which had started in confusion and fear, was now becoming stronger through the very challenges meant to break it. We encouraged one another, reminding ourselves of what we had experienced, of the peace that had come, and of the truth we could not deny. In the middle of the pressure, there were also small moments of light that gave us hope. A young man approached me one evening, quietly, making sure no one else was listening. He told me that he had heard about what happened to us, and that he had also been struggling with questions for a long time. He did not come with accusations, but with curiosity and a sincere desire to understand. That moment reminded me that this was not just about our suffering. Something bigger was happening, something that was beginning to reach others. And deep inside, I began to understand that what we were going through was not the end of our story, but part of something greater. It felt like the beginning of a movement, small and hidden, but real. A kind of awakening that could not easily be stopped, even in a place where it was dangerous to speak openly. The fire of persecution was real, and it tested us in ways we never expected, but it did not destroy our faith. Instead, it refined it. And what was being formed inside us was stronger than anything we had lost. As the days turned into weeks, something began to grow quietly beneath the surface of all the tension and resistance we were facing. It did not happen in open gatherings or public spaces, but in hidden corners, behind closed doors, and in whispered conversations that carried more weight than loud declarations. What started as a personal transformation for the 10 of us slowly began to spread in ways we did not expect. The same questions that had once troubled us were now rising in the hearts of others, and one by one, people began to seek us out, not openly, but carefully, making sure they were not seen or heard by the wrong eyes. I remember one particular night clearly. It was in a small house near the outskirts of Danal district, where we had gathered quietly with a few individuals who had reached out to us. The room was dimly lit, and the air was filled with both fear and anticipation. These were not people who came out of curiosity alone. They came because something inside them was searching, just like we had been. Some had heard fragments of our story, others had experienced moments they could not explain, and a few had already begun reading in secret, trying to understand what was drawing them. As we sat together, there was no sense of formality, no titles, no positions, just people sharing honestly, asking questions, and listening deeply. In that small gathering, I began to see something I had never witnessed before. It was not forced, it was not organized, and it was not driven by human effort alone. There was a sense of presence, calm but powerful, moving among us, touching hearts in a way words alone could not. As we spoke and listened, I could see tears in some eyes, not out of fear, but from a deep realization, the same kind I had experienced that first night. It was as if something invisible was awakening people from within, gently but firmly drawing them toward truth. These gatherings began to happen more often, always in different locations, always with caution. Sometimes it was just 3 or 4 people, other times it was more, but the pattern remained the same. People came with questions, with struggles, with fear, but they left with something different, something peaceful and steady. And even though the risk was always present, there was a growing boldness among those who experienced this change. Not a reckless boldness, but a quiet confidence that could not easily be shaken. What amazed me the most was how this was not limited to just our immediate circle. We began to hear stories from other parts of the city, and even beyond Mogadishu. There were reports of similar experiences happening in different regions, people encountering the same kind of revelation, people turning toward truth in ways that could not be easily explained. It was as if something was moving across the land, not in a loud or visible way, but in a deep and personal manner, reaching individuals where they were. In those moments, I began to understand something that I had never considered before. This was not just about 10 imams in one mosque. It was part of something larger, something that felt connected to a greater purpose beyond our understanding. It reminded me of what I had once heard but never fully believed, that in the last days there would be an awakening, a turning of hearts in places where it seemed impossible. Now I was not just hearing about it, I was living inside it. Despite the dangers, despite the opposition, the movement continued to grow quietly, like seeds planted in hidden soil, taking root where no one expected. And the more it grew, the clearer it became that this was not something that could be stopped by fear or pressure alone. Because when truth reaches the heart and peace settles deeply within, it creates a change that no external force can easily undo. And what was happening in Somalia was only a small part of a much larger awakening that was beginning to rise. As the hidden revival continued to grow, I began to notice patterns that I could not ignore, patterns that connected what we were experiencing in Mogadishu to things I had read long ago in texts I had once dismissed as allegory or legend. The more I observed, the more I realized that the events unfolding around me were part of something much larger than personal transformation or a small, secret movement. There were signs, subtle but undeniable, that the prophecy spoken of in ancient writings was coming to life in ways that were both frightening and beautiful. It started with encounters that seemed coincidental at first. People from distant neighborhoods, individuals I had never met, would arrive at our gatherings, bringing questions that mirrored those I had once carried. Some spoke of dreams, visions, and moments of inexplicable clarity, just as we had experienced. Others told of impossible interventions, doors opening when they felt trapped, guidance appearing when there was no logical explanation. Each story alone could have been dismissed, but taken together, a pattern emerged. There was a movement in the hearts of people that could not be traced to human effort alone. It felt orchestrated, purposeful, and directed toward awakening. One evening, I was sitting quietly with Sheikh Ibrahim and Farah in a safe, hidden room, reviewing the growing reports of these experiences. Farah, usually restless and quick to act, was unusually calm, his eyes reflecting the same light I had seen that night of revelation. Sheikh Ibrahim spoke slowly, with a weight of understanding in his voice. "Yusuf, what we are witnessing is more than personal conviction. This is the unfolding of something foretold, something beyond our comprehension. The seeds we plant now will grow into a harvest we cannot yet see." His words sent a chill down my spine. There was no doubt in his tone. He spoke from experience, from years of study, and from the quiet certainty that comes with divine encounters. As days turned into weeks, the stories continued to arrive. Children whispered of strange dreams where they felt an overwhelming love and clarity, even though they had never been part of our gatherings. Adults confessed to moments where fear had been replaced by peace in impossible situations. Families who had been distant from faith began to seek understanding. It became increasingly clear that these were not isolated events, but pieces of a larger awakening, a prophecy that had been promised to the last days. Yet with the unfolding of this prophecy came a deeper tension. The opposition was growing. Those who clung to the old order sensed the change and reacted, not openly at first, but through influence, intimidation, and subtle threats. It was as though the movement of hearts was being mirrored by a movement of resistance. I realized that what we were witnessing was not only a spiritual awakening, but also a test of courage, of faith, and of commitment. The prophecy was unfolding, but it demanded more than awareness. It demanded action, resilience, and unwavering trust in the unseen. I often thought about Amina during these times and about Khalid. I knew that the path we were walking would ripple outward, touching them, shaping them, and perhaps exposing them to danger. Yet I could also see the small seeds of awakening within them. Amina's quiet questions had transformed into courage, and Khalid's innocent curiosity had begun to mirror the early stages of understanding that had first stirred within me. One night alone in prayer, I felt that same presence as before, stronger this time, yet gentle, as if affirming the course we were on. I understood without words that we were living through the very moment the ancient words had spoken of, that the awakening was not something we were causing, but something we were part of, a current larger than Mogadishu, larger than any one of us. I came to a realization that changed everything. Prophecy does not unfold in grand spectacles alone. It begins quietly, in hidden places, in small hearts willing to listen and obey. And when the moment is right, it rises in power, unstoppable, transformative, and undeniable. The months that followed were a time of both quiet growth and relentless challenge. The movement we had begun in secret spread further than I could have imagined, though still cautiously. More people came with questions, seeking truth, peace, and understanding. And as they came, we realized that our role was no longer simply to guide. They were being awakened in ways that demanded their own response. Each heart that turned became a living testament to the presence we had encountered, a witness to the truth that could not be contained. Yet, with this growth came greater scrutiny and danger. The authorities, the elders, and even peers who had once revered us began to notice the subtle shifts. Rumors turned into accusations, and confrontations became more direct. We were forced to navigate these challenges carefully, balancing the need for truth with the need for protection, not just for ourselves, but for those who were beginning to trust us. Every decision carried weight, every word could ripple outward with unforeseen consequences. Through it all, the peace we had first experienced that night remained our anchor. It was no longer a fleeting emotion, but a foundation upon which we could stand, a certainty that outshone fear. I often reflected on that moment in Haddon District when the presence first came, realizing that it had not only changed me, but had transformed a group of 10 men into a unified force of awakening. What began as personal revelation had become a shared responsibility, a mission that demanded integrity, courage, and unwavering faith. I also understood that the journey was not about recognition, reward, or comfort. It was about becoming conduits for something far greater than ourselves. The more we embraced this calling, the more we saw that true leadership is not about control, power, or influence. It is about service, humility, and love, even when the cost is high. One morning, as I walked through a quiet street in Mogadishu, I looked at the city with new eyes. I saw the struggles, the fear, and the uncertainty around me, but I also saw sparks of hope in faces that had been touched by what we shared. I realized that the awakening was not limited to our circle. It was slowly spreading, quietly yet persistently, in ways that could not be fully measured. And in that moment I understood a profound truth. The journey of revelation does not end with discovery. It begins there. Each choice, each act of courage, and each expression of love became part of a tapestry that extended far beyond us. The path forward would not be easy. It would challenge every assumption, test every conviction, and demand every ounce of courage we possessed. But I also knew that fear no longer held dominion over us. For the first time in my life, I walked freely, guided not by pride or obligation, but by truth, love, and the quiet certainty of what is real. The dawn of this new path was not a loud proclamation or a public spectacle. It was a personal awakening multiplied in hidden hearts, a movement unseen yet unstoppable. And as I held Khalid's hand and looked into Amina's eyes that evening, I realized that the journey we had begun in silence would continue, one step at a time. Guided by the presence that had first revealed itself that night. In the quiet of Mogadishu, in hidden rooms and whispered conversations, a new chapter had begun, not just for us, but for everyone who would open their hearts to the truth. The night everything changed was no longer just a memory. It had become the beginning of a new reality, a reality that demanded courage, resilience, and unwavering faith, and we were ready to walk it together.